Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Fumi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review is going to be on some AI terms. So this particular document is the AI policy for this organization. Let's have a look at the prohibited uses because I think that will be probably the most valuable. Now, some legislation in certain geographies has highlighted prohibited uses of artificial intelligence, and there is AI legislation called the EU AI Act that outlines prohibited activities. So I think it's valuable to take a look at how AI is being utilized at this organization based on their own public-facing document. There's certain uses of generative AI tools that cannot be used at this organization. Okay, let's look at services. Now, the reason I wanted to look at services is generally there's always a group of individuals who a policy applies to. I didn't see at the beginning of this review the scope of the artificial intelligence policy, which is why I've scrolled over services. And I presume that this policy, well, it says here, Sage's policy on the use of AI technology has been developed to assist authors, reviewers, and editors to make good judgment about the ethical use of such technology. So this is the audience. And like we've talked about in the data protection space, we've talked about there are different groups of data subjects. Here, the data subjects are authors, reviewers, and editors, and these are all individuals. When we think about personal data, we're thinking about the information associated with these individuals. Now, this is talking about publication, and it also looks like they do something to do with journals that's in their name. I cannot say one way or another way whether this policy applies to publication of like written materials. That's not clear. That's information that I generally obtain from clients. I still think the value of looking at policies is the implications of privacy and the fact that there is legislation that addresses certain practices that can be utilized when it comes to artificial intelligence. And we can see here there's a mention of ChatGPT, and there are individuals that are using it. But the reason that this is a really good watch today is because I've talked about the distinction between a policy and a notice. And sometimes organizations will refer to the notice that's placed on their site as a privacy policy. Generally, a policy is going to address a specific audience of data subjects, and it's going to provide insight on what is happening internally within the organization. So this is in relation to publication ethics policies. I think it would have been valuable as well to review a artificial intelligence policy that maybe this organization has built internally or has procured, and how authors, reviewers, and editors can utilize that. But irrespective of that, the fact that there's going to be some type of publication, it just says here the use of such technology, and we're not clear on what's being published. But if there's any type of work that is being published, let's say that processes personal data, then we're going to need to look at this from a privacy standpoint too, outside of an artificial intelligence standpoint. I would also be intrigued if there is any AI tools that are approved for using related to publication internal to this organization. Let me see if there is. I'm just scrolling down to see if there's a list of AI that can be used in relation to the publication. There are a lot of details missing from this policy, but I can say that they have discussed the primary or partial use of AI tools producing content such as references, text, and images. So again, we don't have full details about what constitutes publication, but what I can say is if the image can identify an individual, then we've got privacy considerations. I don't know what's within the text, and they've also used some very broad language that says any other content. If any of this other content constitutes personal data, then you can see here what the responsibility is of our data subjects when using the AI tools, whether the primary or partial use of those tools. Now, what is the relationship between an AI policy and what potentially could go out on an AI notice or a privacy notice? If any of these identifies the other content, the images, or the text, if they process personal data, the organization is acknowledging the fact that they understand that this could be ingested through the primary or partial use of AI tools. And depending on who's responsible for the storage of that information or procuring of the AI tools, there is likely going to be a responsibility on this organization. So it all feeds into one another. This organization would then take on responsibility if they are the ones providing the AI tool and allowing their authors, reviewers, and editors to utilize that tool to ingest information related to text, images, or other content that constitute personal data. So there's like a flow. And this is why I think it's really important for privacy counsel to ask a lot of questions about the use or procuring of artificial intelligence, because that is going to dictate who is responsible for what. Is the responsibility for protecting the data on the controller, or is the responsibility for protecting the data on the processor? If both parties are responsible, what is the split in responsibility, and where does the responsibility lie? In addition to that, an organization that facilitates the usage of artificial intelligence, what type of internal documentation is being distributed in alignment with privacy obligations? So it's kind of hard to break that down, but I still think the value of reviewing these documents is businesses should get an insight into what they could put into their privacy documentation. One, to meet their obligations. This policy doesn't detail the jurisdictions. The use of prohibited use does give me an inclination on some of the geographies, but one of the first questions I ask all clients is, in which geographies do you process personal data? Now that's very broad, but the reason that's very broad is to accommodate for the fact that different entities liaise with different groups of data subjects in a myriad of ways, and they all have to be accounted for. And you can see here, this policy is directed to authors, reviewers, and editors. It's not directed to employees, it's not directed towards customers, and it's not directed towards partners or suppliers. Those groups of individuals are going to have their own processing activities associated with the organization that need to be memorialized potentially in a policy or a notice, because the processing activities associated with an employee appear to be different to the responsibility this organization has when an author, reviewer, or editor uses artificial intelligence. I think one thing that's interesting, and maybe we don't have time for this, is there's no discussion that I've seen based on this review on whether or not the AI usage within this organization is in relation to AI that's been procured by this organization. Now, that question is really important, because if the organization is procuring the AI to allow its authors and reviewers and editors to impact the products and services being provided, then they have a responsibility to provide documentation on how the AI can be used. I'm intrigued about this artificial intelligence policy. Maybe it's something generic, but there's no specificity in this policy that this is in relation to how our authors, reviewers, and editors use artificial intelligence. So that would be a really key piece of information that might guide some more discussion on this organization's artificial intelligence policy. The main discussion that I wanted to make today is the fact that there are privacy implications on how you use artificial intelligence, and the responsibility that an organization has on creating this policy is going to depend on a lot of different privacy questions, not just artificial intelligence questions. So I really hope you enjoyed this particular review. If you have comments or questions about what I've discussed, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another one.